All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session dedicated to the threats to academic freedom in Europe. This is a lunchtime event. Hope you already had lunch, or you may have lunch during the event, or we hope we can also offer food for thought, so which can be pleasant and helpful. My name is Daniela Irrera. I'm part of the executive committee, ECPR Executive Committee, and I'm the pleasure and honor to chair the ECPR Working Group on Academic Freedom. We started to include this topic as part of the ECPR General Conference program since last year. Those of you who were in Innsbruck may remember that we decided to have a roundtable discussing the impact of war on academic freedom, and particularly considering the Ukrainian case. And we intend to continue, as we believe that as we are the largest community of political scientists in Europe, we need to stand for academic freedom and take care of this very, very important and sensitive topic. I will just briefly say a few things to introduce the topic and the speakers, and also the blog, which is something that we are very proud of. We started to work as a working group on academic freedom because it is clear that this is something under attack everywhere in the world and in Europe, particularly in Europe. So the attentions towards the state of academic freedom in universities, academic institutions across Europe, particularly across Europe, has vastly grown in these years. Having a look at the last Scholars at Risk report from 2023, we may read it out of 179 countries, there's a decline in academic freedom in 152 countries, and the 50% of the world population, more or less, are significantly affected. So this is a serious phenomenon that it is growing on. So we think that it is necessary to stimulate awareness and proactive reflections, and also to increase awareness of the impact that academic freedom and violations of limitations to academic freedom in various aspects of our academic life can have, as is absolutely necessary within our ECPR community, and also in respect to the other academic institutions as association we are in contact with. So therefore, this is one of the reasons why academic freedom should be part of our policy and research agenda. And for this reason, the panel roundtable, I would better call it a roundtable, is supported and sponsored by our fantastic The Loop blog, which is extremely successful, and we are very, very grateful to the academic editors, to Martin Bull and to Joanne Dolly-Saltness, sorry for the pronunciation, also to the managing editor, Kate Hawkins, for adding this idea. They offered to our working group a spot, so a blog series, which is called the blog series on constraints on academic freedom, which you will find on the website. And we have already published five excellent blogs. Well, 4 excellent blogs plus mine, which was just a foundation. I don't want to say excellent to me. And we expect more from you. So that we presume that you are interested in this topic, and we hope you will contribute to the blog as well. So we look forward to more blogs and to more ideas and suggestions. And obviously, I'm very, very grateful. Let me say that I'm personally very grateful to our chair, David Farrell, that asked me to chair the working group, because this opened a world to me. So we discussed word, unfortunately, many problems, but also a word of exciting reflections, and to the members of the working group, and to Hana Kubátová, who, other than being the excellent host, local host, is also co-editor of the blog series, and so we are working together on this new initiative. We have asked three distinguished speakers to help us in reflecting on academic freedom. I just mentioned their name and affiliations, and obviously please add whatever you may be useful to make us understand about your interest and involvement in this topic. So we have Rafael Pablo Labanino, University of Konstan, who will be the first one. And then we have Beatriz Carbone, Universität des Saarlandes. And Ivana, Karásková, Association for International Affairs. And they will open the debate with an initial speech, and then we hope to have more involvement from the audience. And I would like to ask Hana to co-chair with me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Daniela, for putting this together, and for all of you for coming for an exciting debate. And as Daniela said, I think for me, and I believe for us, if I may say so, this roundtable is an opportunity to get in a more frequent, more personal contact with you and start a debate, and also point your attention to our other platform, the Loop blog series, where we want to continue having a debate. And I think as part of the working group on academic freedom, this is what we have been wanting to do, is to create a platform, create debates, open space of a respectful debate, in-depth endeavors into academic freedom. And we would like for you also to help us reflect on what ECPR as an organization can do. We have had a number of meetings as a working group speaking about a number of issues. We have been contacted with a number of individuals. We had meetings with institutions and other organizations that deal with academic freedom. We have debated, sometimes agreed, sometimes disagreed among each other what we can do. But I think what we need to do, and we want to do now, is also ask you, what do you think we as ECPR can do better to stimulate the debate? What should we focus on, and what can be done? So we will have three presentations, opening statements, and then we would very much like to have your impact on some of the questions that they have raised, but also on what you think we at ECPR could do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Hana. So I would ask Rafael to start. If you have 15 minutes, if you can stay, try to stay in 15 minutes so we have more debate. Thanks.
I will, and I prepared just 3 slides, so don't worry. It's not going to be a PowerPoint presentation. Because can I show can you, how can I? Yeah, there, thank you. Wow. So, oh, okay. Which one? Yeah, fine. So anyway, so I think that first we should. So I will have the opening statement, the first one, and I will kind of speak about, I think, general things and kind of a smorgasbord of problems, and then the other speakers will be more focused on more specific threats to academic freedom, and because I think that we should first perhaps talk about academic freedom as a notion, and that's why it would be important to have my first slide, because it would help me to, yeah, okay, yes, it's there. So this is from the EUI, you know, the European University Association scorecard. So they have an organizational autonomy, then they have financial autonomy, then they have staffing autonomy and academic autonomy, and all these different notions of academic freedom are then detailed into even smaller areas and indicators. So, you know, what is academic autonomy? What is academic freedom? I think that's really important to ask ourselves, because you usually think about academic freedom as the freedom to teach, the freedom to research, but there are other aspects of academic freedom which, if they are threatened or if they are changed, then your work as work as academics constrained without necessarily being a direct constraint on teaching or research, or how we are allowed to speak in public, or so on and so forth. So I think it's and of course this type of EUA scorecard is again a bit blind to a lot of problems. So if you look at the change in okay, I don't know where shall I try to put it, but anyway, so the change, yeah, okay. So the overall change to the measurement, if you look at it, it looks fine, no? In Europe, it's stable. In some cases, it decreased a bit, usually in financial or organizational authority, but it looks okay-ish. Nothing really happened, nothing to see here. Of course, Hungary's absence from the EUA scorecard, if you know the former EUA scorecards and EUA scorecard, then you would know that Hungary was in this scorecard, but this year Hungary was excluded due to a new governance reform, and the EUA declared that Hungary has such a new system that it cannot be compared. So very diplomatically, it cannot be compared to anything else. And then they also listed the problems. But so the problem is with this kind of scorecards, I think, and this kind of thinking is that you miss the subtle changes. And then, of course, you don't miss the big ones, and then you get to exclude a country. But by the time we got there, it's like too late, I think. But I think it's still really important to think about academic freedom in this manner, that it is consisting of different aspects, and not only teaching and research. So there are, of course, overt threats to academic freedom, which are easy to recognize, like Turkey, which is, of course, an even more extreme case than Hungary today. But there are more subtle threats, but clearly visible. Like if you think about the free speech, so-called free speech crisis in Britain, which was constructed in the press and then by various usually conservative political actors, and now there's a free speech law and there's a free speech czar. I think a professor from the University of Cambridge who should look at this kind of threats to academic freedom, which are understood, or free speech is understood as people are getting cancelled or disinvited from universities. So this is again it's not that subtle, so we can recognize it as a threat. Or if you think about Sweden, where the new government, or this new right-wing government, shut down all developmental studies. So they actually revoked funding which was already accepted en masse. So this is again a clear threat to academic freedom, I think. And then Andra Petu, who wrote a really good blog, a professor from CU in this Loop series, she warns us that there are even more subtle changes that can lead to the dissolution or the weakening or hollowing out of academic freedom. And she lists 4, like breaking academic norms, where you shut down, where governments are shutting down or revoking accreditation to academic programs, which happen in Hungary to gender studies, for example. Then but you don't have to necessarily be so open. You can also bend the rules, so you just don't give funding to certain areas, or you parachute into new leaders in a wishy-washy way. But it's not kind of an open threat. You can always find people who would cooperate with you, or that you can also use extra legal methods like media campaigns against academics, which we saw in Britain, or the specification, which is kind of an open thing when you are reorganizing educational programs, dissolving existing programs, or you, as it happened in Hungary, you have family studies instead of gender studies. So this is kind of a clear ideological program. But then, so this is I think what we when we think about threats to academic freedom, then we think about this. But let me add some other things like precarity of academics. I think that's a major threat which is overlooked. We all a bit. I think we're all a bit, as in Germany, in the Mittelbau, we're a bit ashamed that we have these precarious positions. But this is a huge threat. So the German Ich bin Hana movement, which is kind of trying to counteract this precarity, is again, I think, Germany is always really up high on all academic freedom rankings, even in the VDEM rankings. But this is kind of a freedom of established professors who are like 10% of the working force. So everyone else is kind of precarious and doesn't really have that much freedom in what to do and how to teach and what to research. Then you have, of course, a global discrepancy in power. And we in political science are also perpetuating this in Europe, and even in ECPR journals. I think everybody who is researching non-Western countries, so not the usual suspects, or are from a non-Western context. So even in Eastern European EU member states, you don't have to be in the global South to be discriminated. Then your cases are seen as area studies. But nobody could ever explain to me why a single case study on Netherlands is not an area study, and why a single case study on Poland, which is like much bigger and much more important at the moment in Europe politically, is not area studies. And why something in the US, which is a really particular context, it's a colonist country with a history of slavery. It's an indigenous perspective. It's a very specific society, and everything what is researched there seen as general, and it is not. It is as much as an area study as anything else. So I think going down to that, because people asked what organizers like ECPR can do. So for example, So for example, first, of course, have scholars who are in exile from such contexts as Russia or Turkey or China or other overtly hybrid or authoritarian, totalitarian regimes. Of course, help them, but help them in a way that they can stay in academia, because most of these scholars who arrive to Europe are facing this kind of, again, exclusive context, for example, in Germany, and then after a while, like 3-4 years, they are out of academia and then out of jobs like everyone else is, and they are worse off because they don't have the contacts, and then they face this kind of European exclusive cultures and so on and so forth. So, but that's one thing which we should do. We should also, I think, help kind of give more funding to PhDs and colleagues from non-free or threatened academic contexts or poor countries to attend such events like this, and maybe have them, I don't know if it's possible, but to have them with the visa requirements, or organize conferences where people can get into the country from non-EU member states or non-EU member countries or global South countries. And then, of course, initiate a discourse on this kind of colonialism, for lack of a better word, in political science, openly with the people who are affected by it. So not, don't initiate a discourse among Cambridge and Freie Uni and Humboldt scholars, but initiate a discourse with people who are actually affected by this problem. And then, raise awareness and maybe have a best practices requirements or suggestions, and openly, for at least for the ECPR journals, make reviewers and editors aware of this, and that not to tolerate such kind of practices. And then, of course, initiate a discourse, and that will be addressed on exchange with researchers and institutions in non-free academic contexts, how to support them. I mean, independent researchers and institutions without causing harm. So without, supporting people who are actually in the oppressive structure. So we should not reinforce that. And for that, we have to initiate a discourse with those people who are independent researchers in this context. And it's not that easy to recognize. We had this in the Eastern European Standing Group once, that we received by the mailing list an invitation to a conference to Budapest, which I'm from Hungary, so I was a bit taken aback that yeah, it's a really lavishly funded, and they pay for your visit, and then I checked who is the organizer, and one of the organizers was Corvinus University, which is a perfectly respectable university, but the other one was actually a government-affiliated think tank, and then I raised alarm that this is not, we shouldn't advertise such events. So that's what I mean when I say that we should, initiate discourses on these things and talk about them openly. And then I think more research to academic freedom is necessary, especially in recognizing these subtle structures that are maybe, or subtle changes that maybe affect finance, organization, and not directly, it's not kind of a direct over attack on academic freedom, but some other, more subtle way of affecting the freedom of academics and universities. And we should also aim at understanding the experiences of people who are affected by it, and also of exiled scholars who are exiled to Europe or to the US or other Western academic institutional systems. So that would be my opening thoughts for this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rafael, for breaking ice and also for giving these suggestions, which are absolutely relevant, and we should be careful in all things that we do. I mean, as a CPR, we do many things in journals and advertising conferences, and as also you said that more research on academic freedom is necessary. It's also something that I never realized. But then in this last year, having more and more contact with people working on academic freedom or trying to raise more awareness on academic freedom is becoming clear to me that, and it would be nice to see how many people are currently researching on academic freedom among us. I don't know. It would be nice to know. And also probably to fund research or research groups on academic freedom to know more. So thank you so much. Beatriz? Please.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very glad to be part of this panel. It's a very important talk, and we should definitely talk about it. A little bit about myself. I'm a Brazilian political scientist. I did my PhD in Germany at Frankfurt University, and I have been researching and living in Germany and working in Germany, mostly on topics related to intersectionality, gender, and racism. So when I was invited to be part of this panel, I was also asked to mention what's the relationship between current debates on diversity and academic freedom. And I was glad that I was asked this, because I think that's something that we really need to talk about. As my colleague just introduced the concept of academic freedom, and we see that it is coined towards conflicts that we had in the past, and it, as I see it, it doesn't accommodate so much other kinds of conflicts that we have nowadays. For example, we think about academic freedom as constraints coming from outside, constraints related to autonomy, integrity, as we relate it to the political system, but we don't look so much on what is going inside of academia as well. It's also a space where we have this debate where we see nowadays lots of polarization against, for example, we see right-wing populists and conservatives calling gender studies and race, critical race studies as political ideology, as indoctrination, as pseudosciences. But is this debate that's only outside of academia? Don't we experience this kind of things as scholars, between colleagues as well? So if I think about academic freedom, the question that triggers me is, do we enjoy the same levels of academic freedom? I don't think we do. And this is related also to racialized and gender dynamics that we have at the university and we don't talk so much about. For example, I was in a conference a couple of years ago, and even it was a gender-specific conference where people are supposed to be trained on diversity and have a different level of sensibility and sensitivity. There was a performance in which the N-word was spoken and repeatedly spoken. At some point, there were only 2 Black people at the audience, which also shows that it was not a very diverse environment. And one of them raised the hand and said, okay, we cannot say this word anymore. It's very offensive and it's dehumanizing, and I'm a Black person, I don't want to hear it. And it prompted, of course, a big discussion. And at the end of the day, someone took the microphone and said, we are in Germany and we have freedom of speech and we say whatever we want to say. This is a performance and this is a quotation. We are quoting it. We are not saying it by ourselves. So I think we really have to think about how much of racism and sexism is still done and is still perpetuated, and it comes under the protection of academic freedom. So we really need to think about how we can engage in critical ways with the concept as well. For example, another experience is teaching, as I have been teaching on gender-related topics for the past years. I also have been collecting lots of experiences from my students. And in one of them, we get, of course, our evaluation reports at the end of each seminary. And the person wrote and also spoke about this with me, that it felt like a safe space. And I asked, but is it not always a safe space? No, it's not. As a queer person, I have to negotiate and I have to hear and I have to always deal with homophobic comments. And this is something that I would like to think that academia should be also a safe space to everyone, that we don't have any kind of practice that constrain and also perpetuate this kind of we have different levels of freedom, and it shouldn't be like this, of course. So what I would point out is that we need further debate, because you asked us also to analyze or to have an input on how we could bring the debate forward. We definitely need to accommodate also and to bring the challenge of diversity also to the discussion of academic freedom. I don't think that they are separate from each other. And I absolutely understand that academic freedom is something we have to preserve and protect, but it's also not something we should not criticize as well. And it's something that needs also to be also updated and improved for sure. And we need critical examinations and to see where academic freedom should not be just an umbrella to protect practices that we do not agree with. We have compromise with anti-discrimination. We are committed also to diversity and the freedom. We are a democracy. Okay, not every country is a democracy, but if we are committed to liberal democracy, we should also take into account that freedom should be experienced by everyone in the workplace. And by freedom, I just don't mean formal or rhetorical freedom, but we have silencing practice, we have practice of invisibility that are also connected to this gendered and racialized dynamics that we need to bring into awareness, and we need to further improve and to further talk about. So that would be my statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beatriz, for sharing your views and also so many experiences. And it is true that we should look at what is happening inside the academia. This is something that should not be undervalued. Okay, so the last speaker, third and last, Ivana, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Great to be here on this panel. My expertise seemingly do not fit into the topic of freedom of academia, this broader panel, because I have been focusing specifically on People's Republic of China for the past 20 years. I'm international relationist, focusing on Chinese foreign policy, and for the past 7 years, focusing specifically on Chinese influence in Europe, including academia. That brings me to the field. If China goes somewhere, I have to follow. Over the past 20 years, and especially with Xi Jinping's ascent to power, we have seen China more and more focusing on the discourse power, on upgrading how it wants to be, or redefining how it wants to be seen internationally. And it uses a number of tools for that. And it's not very shy about it. It's quite very specific. It's specific in English. It's very, very specific in Chinese. If you look at Chinese documents, all those methods are very well described there, and objectives are described there as well. So some of the tools, of course, comes with reaching out to opinion leaders or opinion makers, meaning also academics, and specifically those who are talking about what China finds as the core issues or critical issues, such as Xinjiang, such as Tibet, Taiwan, Hong Kong, South China Sea, but more broadly, human rights issues and so on. The list actually, if you notice, the list actually increases and increases over the time. So more and more issues are added to this sensitive category of areas. Recently, I think 4 or 5 years ago, there was a poll done among China researchers on how they research China, how they approach the topic of their studies. And 70% of them said that they do apply some sort of self-censorship because of the fear that if they are too critical, or if they are even considered critical, or if they are touching those core areas, they may be denied access to the case of their study, which is People's Republic of China. And these cases already happened by denial of visas, by denial of visiting certain academic institutions, by severing ties with those academic institutions, by being invited to, the metaphor is to drink tea at the Chinese embassy. It's where you are invited to the local Chinese embassy and told that what you research or what you write or what you teach about is not true, that it's not in line with how China would like to portray itself, and that there may be repercussions if you do misbehave in future as well. So probably 70% is not that surprising number when it comes to academics. Another tool, of course, is the funding of China studies all over the world. There have been numerous reports on that. I'm quite sure that you know about it as well. Establishment of Confucius Institutes, which are kind of a hybrid, in a hybrid or gray zone. Some Confucius Institutes do as they should do. They are teaching language, they are teaching culture. Some are much more, let's say, ambitious in trying to reach out also to either the students of Chinese language or the general public with their approach on how China should be understood in especially those critical areas. So Confucius Institutes were also added or enlarged to Confucius classrooms. That's even grayer or grayish area, because sometimes they reach out to students of high schools or even younger ones. And as I said, this is highly problematized areas, because if we say that Confucius Institutes are problematic, it puts all those, let's say, good ones, or those who basically do as they should do, as British councils, as Goethe Institutes, and as other institutes, we put them in the same category. So I would like to differentiate here a little bit and just put it there that the jury is still out there, that it's very undecided. Funding is problematic in the European Union. We know about that. We know about it in the Czech Republic as well, where the government announced quite severe cuts for universities and for education in general. So it's probably no surprise that Chinese funding has been seen as quite a welcome addition to the funding. And it should not be stigmatized as such. Once again, we are getting to the gray area, because first of all, who should fund China studies? If it's not the national country itself, who else is there to basically do that? So that we need China expertise and we need Chinese language speakers in a broader scale in European Union. So I would still argue for universities and higher education institutions to keep the autonomy to look for funders, including People's Republic of China, but then it has a hooks, and we can talk about that in Q&A session of how many hooks there actually are and what we can do about that. And last but not least, one tool which I would like to mention here is the systemic abuse of Chinese diaspora, including Chinese students. We do have a lot of reports and a lot of testimonies actually coming out of from Chinese students describing how they are monitored by the Chinese embassies in countries abroad, including the Czech Republic, including in the EU, how their schoolmates are actually making sure that they are in line with the patriotic education. From my personal experience, I have taught at Chinese University at the Faculty of Social Sciences 3 classes on China, Chinese geopolitics, EU-China relations, and Chinese foreign policy. And I noticed over those 7 years that suddenly a lot of mainlanders from a lot of Chinese students from People's Republic of China started to attend the classes. Perhaps the reason could be that they thought it's about China, they are Chinese, it's going to be easy credits. Perhaps the reasons were different because some of my students were from a political scientist. Its classes were taught at the political science department, and some of the students were from mathematics, from physics, from informatics, from very different fields than you would expect them to basically go to MA class focusing on very specific issues on China. So I noticed that there has been an increase or influx of Chinese students. In some years, it was more than 50% of students taking the class were actually of Chinese origin coming from mainland China. And there was also a decrease of Taiwanese and Hong Kongers taking those classes. And I was approached by one of the Hong Konger saying, we no longer feel safe to take this class because we know that we are monitored. And if you lecture about Xinjiang, Taiwan, South China Sea, we are supposed to stand up and say that what you are saying is not true, or that we basically demand that South China Sea, for example, is put on the map as a Chinese territory and not, you should not use the international map and so on. So that's touched up on a lot of issues of, on one hand, as I said, it's great to have Chinese talents. It's important to have those kind of communication, as communication is severely impacted. We as lecturers cannot go easily to China, at least some of those who are on the sanction list or those who were advised against that. So the only way how we can actually communicate with the Chinese youth is through having Chinese students enrolled into European universities to talk to them. But in the same time, we put them in the risk of being critical, and in that case, there may be repercussions from the home government or from the fellow students, or not being critical or just sit there. And in that case, they probably would fail the class, especially if it's based on the debates and critical assessment of sources and so on. So this trait, I think, fits into the freedom of academia, because academia is not just academics, it's also students, and how we should protect them and how we should provide a safe space for them to critically think, to say whatever they want to say. It's not the case of the Czech Republic and less so case of the European Union, but there were also demonstrations in Australia, in Canada, against critical scholars, against students who were not shown, who are not seen as patriotic, and so on. So that leads me towards the question of what is exactly the result of this, let's say, tightening up of space inside the People's Republic of China. What is the result of the lack of communication between us researching China and China as such, China proper? I think it would lead probably to misperceptions and growing up misperceptions on both analytical side of the EU as well as the Chinese side, which may lead to a lot of miscalculations in the future as well. There is already growing distrust towards Chinese academics, towards Chinese students as such, and that's something we should also address in this regard. And what we can do about that, it's like a Pandora box. Every time you think you have a perfect solution, you open the solution, you find out 10 good reasons why not to do that. But just to put it very broadly here, I think that we should still try to reach out to People's Republic of China. We should still try to keep the academic cooperation, though there should probably be areas which should not be that openly available for joint cooperation, to put it in a very blunt way, areas which may have dual use implications, where the research actually can be used by People's Republic of China's army, People's Liberation Army, should probably be reconsidered. There should still be push towards leveling the playing field, making sure that what Chinese students and academics can research within the EU should be equally, reciprocally open to European scholars and students, which is not the case, sadly. There should be, I think, more of addressing of hypocrisy we have within the EU. Here I'm thinking about the case in 2017 where Springer and Cambridge University Press decided to remove some of the articles from their journals in China, such as China Quarterly. They removed 300 articles which dealt with sensitive issues such as Tibet, Taiwan, South China Sea, and so on, for the fear that they will lose market of China. So either we want to keep freedom of academia, and that would cost us something, or we don't. The call is basically on our side. And something which mentioned Rafael as well is the question of providing free space for scholars to cooperate with scholars at risk, for example, to make sure that those who are critical of the authoritarian regimes, that they may have a free space to go to research, to continue basically lecturing and doing what they were doing. And I would stop here. And as I said, I'm willing to open the Pandora box if you're interested.
Thank you very much, Ivana. I believe the Pandora box is already open, I'm afraid, and we have lots of things for discussion. And also thank you for opening an additional perspective. We all have Chinese students or students from Iran or other countries at risk in our universities, in our courses, and it is something that we may discuss and share as well. So now, thanks to our speakers for allowing more time for discussion. So we have time for interacting. So we open the floor now to questions or comments. And obviously we have also people online. So also people online are free to interact with us and type in the chat. Thanks. Anyone would like to start? Oh, David, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for a fascinating, very stimulating panel. If you forgive me, I'll just focus one question on the last speaker. So my university has a Confucius Institute, and it's probably the nicest building on campus. So my university has made a financial contribution that has now tied it in to having a Confucius Institute on our campus. And so we have a situation where business students in my university are being taught the politics of China by the Confucius Institute. And try as we might, my department has been unable to get the university authorities to stop that. Their excuse is that it's not Confucius, it's another institute that is associated with Confucius, but the leadership of both are identical. So we have a particular problem, but I suppose my question is more general. Is there a view in relation to Confucius institutes? Why do they need to be on a university campus? Other countries have their cultural bodies separate from the universities. should we not, as a profession, be saying that Confucius Institutes in universities are a bad thing?
Thank you. I'm a scholar who works in Hong Kong, and I'm Ukrainian at the same time. That's an interesting kind of discussion that we have about the Chinese environment. Hong Kong, as you probably know, lives through this transition at the moment. And I would say there is a difference between organizational cultures in prestigious universities and second-tier, third-tier universities. And we don't discuss enough, I think, the issue of self-censorship, right? And I observed this issue of self-censorship here in Europe when Ukrainian issues are discussed, for example, right? Because it's an inconvenient type of truth about this child in terms of Ursula Le Guin's child suffering while as a condition for everyone else's enjoyment. I don't want to undermine, there was a marvelous talk by Professor Maria Popova, and I would like to thank people who organized her presentation. But in the Ukrainian panel, for example, where I made my presentation, right, I was pushed into this kind of bubble where Ukrainians were talking in online without a room given for others to participate, right? Because now we have people in the room and online. But for Ukrainians, they were only online, they were talking among themselves. And my presentation, which didn't relate to what they were discussing there, was pushed into there because I'm Ukrainian, right? So we're talking about freedom. We have to speak about organization, venues, differences in terms of how it's all structured, right? So we don't have to build all the discussion on these kind of assumptions that Europe is more democratic and open, and the East is less democratic or open for all kinds of conversations. That would be my remark. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much for your lectures. This is a question to probably all of our presenters. We all know that, for example, machine learning techniques or AI supporting techniques like ChatGPT and some additional models are becoming much more common in writing papers. So is like using artificial intelligence to support your scientific work in analysis, in writing papers, in improving your work, language checking, is it a threat to academic freedom? Or is it a limitation to academic freedom?
Yeah, interesting question. Thank you. So we have 3 questions from the audience, and Hana will have one, and then we have the first round of feedbacks.
These were all excellent questions, and I think can take up the space. So, but I was intrigued by the opening of Pandora's boxes. I like that. So let's open one, and that was how do we, with all the issues that were raised, how do we have a debate and a conversation? How do we, when Rafael, you were saying about, being aware of where the invitations come, who is behind the invitations and conferences and workshops with relation to what is going on in Hungary. And as an alumni of CU, I understand what you are saying. So where is the line that we cross, and how do we have debates, if we do, with those working at state-sponsored universities, such as there are institutions, not only in Budapest, but in Poland and elsewhere. With Beatriz, what you were saying about your experience with Germany and, using the N-word and saying, we're not saying it, we're quoting it. Do we still have debate? And if so, how do we communicate this, which you mentioned, which seems to me as a very hard way to come into communication with on that? And Ivana, you already mentioned that in your talk, that perhaps there is something that you would have some words on. And I was wondering, you mentioned with the Chinese students, but do we do we then invite academics from China? I mean, we were having the discussion at this university. I mean, do we open centers? We closed one center, the Charles University's Chinese center. But what does that mean? Where do we cross a line? And I understand it as somebody at our university, we have now about 20% of our first year students are from Ukraine. And the level of intensity of debates it brings, especially when we have students from Russia and Belarus in the class, is something that I was wondering, how do I help facilitate the debate in such an environment? Am I the right person to do it? How do I do it? Should I not do it because I'm out of space? So I would be curious and very eager to hear what you think about the debate, if we can have one.
Shall we reverse the order? So Ivana, you may start, and then Beatriz, and then Rafael.
That's good because I still remember the questions, so that's great. To the gentleman in the back on Confucius Institute, well, I would probably make it a little bit more general than just focusing on Confucius Institute as such, or one specific Confucius Institute at one specific country. I think there are two interconnected problems to that. One is the scope and the content of the agreement, which in very many cases is actually not public, and which in those cases where it was forcefully made public, actually those universities signed up to deal with all the issues according to the Chinese law. And it was also the case of the Olomouc University here in the Czech Republic, that it has this very specific clause that everything will be dealt with according to the Chinese national law. And the second part of that was that if you decide to expel Confucius Institute or to terminate the contract, in very specific cases, sometimes there are almost no ways how to do that legally, because there may be a clause which says that it's possible to do it only in one single day, which is specifically named there. And if you fail to do that, according to a number of very difficult bureaucratic procedures, basically the contract automatically is renewed. So first of all, perhaps just a rule of thumb, don't enter in these kind of disadvantageous cooperation. Second, as academics, we should probably push universities to be much more transparent, which they would not like to do. And I can say that safely because I no longer teach at Charles University. But it's not just about Charles University. There's a specific regulation prepared by the European Commission called Defense of Democracy Package. And one part of that is push for increased transparency of funding of academia, NGOs, media, and so on. The first who arrived to lobby against the regulations were actually the associations of universities. So here is the question, of course, how much transparency we would like to see and what we can as academics do. And there I think we are not powerless. We can actually push for more transparency on the content of the contract, on how much funding is actually coming from different sources, on what kind of activities this funding is coming to, and so on. And as I said, it's interconnected, content and the funding. But that comes into, I use the Pandora box, that comes into the problem of the lack of understanding or trust between universities and the state. And it's something we know here very well as a post-communist country where universities were pressured by the state apparatus to either teach or not teach on different issues, either accept or not accept different students with critical views and so on. So there is a very high sensitivity, I would say, in post-communist countries towards what the state authorities actually want to impose on universities. But I would argue it's probably a trait in the EU as a whole. Maybe we are just on the extreme side of the things, but there is really a lack of trust of if the government collects information, how they're going to be used. If the government comes up with voluntary guidelines, maybe the guidelines will become mandatory one day and so on. So maybe that's one area where we will not go further if there is no more trust between universities and the state. And to the question on AI, whether it is a threat, maybe not for now, at least from speaking from where I sit, maybe not for now, but it will probably be in the future's time. And what I mean is that so far AI tools are free to use by anyone. Most likely they will be marketized in the future, so you will have to pay to have an access to them. And we will probably divide the scholarly world into haves and have-nots. So those who can afford that and those who can't do that, and that's a discrimination in making. And the second part, of course, is where the data goes. So if you're writing, a paper which is based on, let's say, interviews, would you feed it to the software where you have no idea where it actually goes, and what will happen to those waivers that the interviewees were, for example, dealt with in an ethical way? If you ask artificial intelligence tools to count, who was in favor, who said what in different interviews, questionnaires, and so on. So that would be my concern as well. And very last to the last question, Hana, you mentioned that Charles University closed its Czech China Research Center. Just for those who are not familiar with the background, we had, under the previous rector, we had established this center, or the university established this center. It didn't allocate funds to the center, and the center decided that the best way how to get some funds would be to approach Chinese embassy in Prague. So the Chinese embassy paid for the annual conferences, which were unsurprisingly perhaps very uncritical when it comes to China, which featured military officials from the People's Liberation Army lecturing to the Czech audience, for example, in a very unrestrained way, I would say. And something which probably pains me more than annual conferences is that some researchers affiliated with this center decided to make it a profitable business by opening a class on Belt and Road Initiative, which was not only paid for by the taxpayers' money, because Charles University is a public university, but they also billed it secretly to the Chinese embassy in Prague. They sent invoices to the Chinese embassy for teaching this class. This class was once again highly uncritical and relying on Chinese official sources. No single source was actually critical in the syllabus. And last but not least, those researchers or lecturers also screened students, and prospective students were invited later on by the Chinese embassy to fully funded trip to China. So there was also a breach in GDPR in sharing information about your students with the Chinese embassy here in Prague. So the center, after the scandal was broke by the media, the center was closed. And there is, I would say, specific sensitivity within the Charles University, but also within the Czech academia towards China issues currently, and how to deal with the Chinese students. As I already mentioned, some in some classes, it's much more problematic in others, but also how to deal with Chinese incoming researchers. I would like to mention, for objective reasons, that the constraints are both ways. It's not just Czech academia being cautious about whom to invite, how to do due diligence if you don't speak Chinese, how to basically navigate in this environment. But it's also on the Chinese side. Chinese academia faces a lot of concerns or a lot of constraints. If you're a Chinese person, Chinese lecturer or academic, you are given, if I'm not mistaken, 14 days abroad per year. And you have to, of course, report where you are going, whom you are meeting, what was the topic of the research, what they said to you, and so on. If you have 2 weeks, if I'm mistaken, I'm sorry for that, but I do believe it's 2 weeks. If you have 2 weeks per year, you would probably travel to other places than to the Czech Republic. You would probably go to Brussels, Berlin, Washington. So that also hinders cooperation. I don't have a silver bullet for that. I think that due diligence is the key for that. Having in mind that those who are allowed to travel are travel for a specific reason, that they most likely are not those highly critical or, let's say, people you would like to perhaps do joint research with. But that's my very, say, personal comment on here. But saying so, I would also not put everyone in the same basket. So still we are in this due diligence sphere.
So thank you for your question. I would say that the situation in particular with the N-word or any kind of slurs, it's not about harsh communication. There's no one nowadays that doesn't know that we don't talk in those terms anymore. So people choose to use those words. And when this happens, we're not talking about communication, but lack of communication. In this particular case, they shouldn't just left because they voiced the complaint, they explained why, they should not even have to explain why. It's our job to know that. And they left, so there's no possibility of communication. If you are in a room and you are you're a minority there, and you also don't have, of course, it would be different if they were a famous professor, for example. In this case, this is what happens, and this is how I connected it to freedom, because then you cannot be in those space anymore. Then your voice is not there.
Well, just quickly to this diversity question of using N-word, and I think this is a problem, a bigger problem, as Beatriz was mentioning, is this diversity problem, which I think we are very much not aware of in Europe and in ECPR. For example, ECPR I don't think, I couldn't find a policy of ECPR, for example, for diversity, like racial diversity, or is there? No, it's not. Is there something, or not yet? Okay, you are working on it.
There will be.
There will be, okay.
Very soon. We have been working on something that we would be able to put on our website, and I think we are almost ready. So
Okay.
we had a meeting on Monday and it was finalized. So in the coming days, I think will be available.
But anyway, I think if you think about European academia, even Western European academia, which is where you have a large migrant populations of non-white, so people of color, you don't really see that many non-white persons, and especially in political science, I think the gender issue is of course I don't want to mansplain that, but I think it's more diverse now. So you see more women also in professional positions, and there's some consciousness about that. For example, in Germany, not everywhere, not in Switzerland, for example. I'm studying in Switzerland, and they had an economics department, kind of an all-male panel, but in Bern at the time when I was there. But the political science department was not like that. So the young professors were all female. And they were consciously trying to attract more female PhD students. So that was, but kind of the intersectional understanding of diversity is completely missing from official policies and also from national contexts, and I think that's quite obvious. If you're a non-white person, then for example, I'm a people of color, and I remember when I was in I think in Wrocław on the ECPR conference, that was a really interesting feeling that I was standing there among at least thousand political scientists in this reception, and I was the only one, at least what I could see. Last year in Innsbruck, we found each other with another guy, and we were talking a bit, because I think he was happy to see someone. But this is it sounds absurd, but this is how it is. I mean, and I'm not saying that he doesn't complain or I didn't complain. I don't feel discriminated. It's just obviously not diverse. like really obviously. And I think and there you have this kind of problems of using N-word and completely unreflected way of speaking. And of course, there you have this kind of, which I mentioned, this free speech crisis. If you mention or say this, if you oppose these things, then you might be accused of trying to restrict the free speech of others. So I think we need much more consciousness around these issues and much more awareness. And put it there with the gender issue as well, because this, of course, then you have people, of course, who are women. Or so there's even so you have this kind of hierarchies of being discriminated and not represented in academia. Yeah.
Thank you. And also I take this chance for inform everyone that there will also be a document on academic freedom. There will be soon a guidelines that we have prepared that we will be posted soon on the website. And just to add, it's not just, as Rafael mentioned, the problem of preparing documents or having a policy or fulfilling from a formal point of view. I believe that that these big associations, like organizations like ECPR, obviously, should also adapt to the changes in the world, in the society. And we obviously need to change our mind and our the way we think about these emerging phenomena. And obviously, the more members we have, the more people come to the conferences, the more diverse is the community, the more we need to include everyone, welcome everyone, and talk about these very sensitive issues. Well, I think we have time for half an hour still, so we may have time for another round of questions.
Thank you. My name is Daria, and I thank you all for your contributions. I have a question about the way that academic freedom relates to private institutions and private funding bodies. And so we heard already a bit about the cautious mistrust that exists to governmental institutions and their oversight. And I wonder if we could say something about the need to also have a similar attitude towards private institutions. This is coming from personal experience. I work at a private university in Germany, and with the recent change of shareholders, we've also experienced quite a turbulent process of changes to the curriculum, to the teaching practices, and in a certain extent, really, myself and my colleagues have experienced significant limitations to our academic freedom, to what we can teach, to what we can research, to where we can publish, because in addition to oversight from certain bureaucratic agencies, there's also a limitation that comes from the interest of the shareholders. And so there's been a shift of the role of academics from creators of knowledge, of educators, merely to facilitators of knowledge, where the demands of students are seen as very significant. And there's been this change of attitude towards students more as customers rather than as co-creators of knowledge and education. And so this rather transactional aspects is just one limitation that comes from this, but I'm just wondering what you might have to say about these limitations and how ultimately we can navigate them. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin Bull, University of Salford, and one of the Loop editors. I just wanted to dwell on, sort of ask reflections on this issue of the relationship between the state and universities. You know, because the obvious examples that have been talked about are. Although Sweden was emphasised as well, but the state acting in such a way as to restrict academic freedom. And I just want to comment that there are it seems to me there are many subtle ways in which this can operate, mainly because the state provides the regulatory framework for universities in most countries. So I'll give you an example from the United Kingdom at the moment, which seems to me at the moment isn't very well known about outside of the UK. But the current government is pretty obsessed, as it has been for nearly 2 decades now, with so-called STEM subjects, that is the science, medicine side, and have been attempting through various means to influence school leaders to go into those subjects and not into the social sciences or the humanities. And the latest version of this is really quite, I would say, is threatening to academic freedom, in the sense that we understand that universities, if academic freedom is to be anything, it's not just about the freedom to research what you want, but it should be the freedom to how do we build research? We do it through teaching students in a diverse range of programs. So the current regulatory framework now is this, I think, has come from the ability to use data in ways that wasn't possible before, is to the focusing in on progression rates of students, not only through each level, each year of their education, but also into employment. And so universities now are being seen by the government effectively no longer as havens of academic discussion, blue skies research, but rather as training grounds for employees. And where the universities fail in that respect, then the government has dictated that programs will close. So in other words, when I talk about the data on progression, they are focusing, drilling down into programs, degree programs, and where programs fail to deliver, fail to meet certain progression targets, including students after they've left university, within 6 months to 1 year, obtaining what they call a job in a profession, then if the data together means that the programs have failed to meet them, then those programs will close. So I think that's an example of the way in which the state, it has so much means at its disposal through its power to regulate, to actually start to dictate what programs universities should be delivering to students. I find it quite sinister. Thank you.
I have a question regarding the oligopolistic structure of science, and I'm talking about publishers. And I have this question because I think during this year or maybe last year, a discussion in academic circles began that there's a market failure, and it is in connection with the very inequalities. You just mentioned kind of a symbolic part of this kind of critique is that there was a meme. It was actually a real article, I believe, published in a Nature journal about the growing inaccessibility of science, and it was behind a paywall. And I'm just curious about to what extent do you think that it is a question of academic freedom? And I know that there are much more urgent issues, as I graduated in the last Budapest cohort of the Central European University, which was forced out of the country. But I think that maybe we should also talk about more about this kind of inner problems of academia as well. Thank you.
I don't see any other hand raised. Okay, if I may add my own comment, I take this chance, the chair, to also add at the very end some very brief reflections on what you have said. So the two main things. So the first thing is I was thinking how academic freedom intersects with diplomacy in a way, because I was thinking to the Italian case, for example, when the universities in Italy have received last year a note from the Minister of Foreign Affairs saying that good relations with China are a priority. And so it is, if you like, it can be good if you can stress more your interest towards research on China and also relations with the Confucius Institutes. And so there was a huge debate among the academic communities. I was participating to some meetings with deputy rectors for international affairs on the fact that this is soft diplomacy, so the way through which China is trying to introduce is a good phase also in the universities. And it was interesting the fact that there was a kind but strong suggestion coming from the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So the education at some point can also have some kind of overlaps with diplomacy. I mean, this may happen, and when this happens, obviously, it opens another Pandora box, obviously, because it's a huge problem for universities. I mean, we may like or dislike, we may decide to follow, we simply disregard this suggestion. And I'm also thinking of, for example, the case of Egypt, like all Italian universities started to boycott relations with Egyptian universities when an Italian student of Oxford, Giulio Regeni, was killed in Egypt. So this is kind of things may happen, and I was just thinking of what your idea about this. And then the second, also Beatriz pushed me more to think about what is happening inside the academia. I like the idea of that we are also instructors, so we should also be facilitators of knowledge among our students. And for example, our groups of students are becoming more and more cultural, so it's much easier now to have in the same classroom students with different views, different ideas about, I teach international relations, so if I talk about conflicts, obviously, it's very easy to have different views, and I often have to mediate among different views, but also when not only among students, but also in relations with other colleagues, because it happened to me as that a colleague of mine, students, asked me to help them because one of my colleagues, a professor of the same course, was using as you said, words which were absolutely not proper, like yellow people referring to Chinese, or using the metaphor of blonde women for talking about stupidity. I mean, this is something that it may still happen. And then students raised the problem because it was not, I mean, it is how can we know what happens in the classroom also? How can we know how fair our colleagues are in respect to students? We know, obviously, relations among us as colleagues, but this is also something that, according to me, should be part of the academic freedom debate. And so if there is any other last comment or question, I don't want to forget anyone. Okay, so we are now for the last time for the last round. So we restart with Rafael.
Okay, just really quickly, so that others also have their chance to answer. So private universities, I think, is a really good question, and we should not only focus on the state, but also on private actors. And I think there was also this scandal. I don't know if it's your university. There was also this scandal in Germany that a political science professor was actually a really renowned was in Bremen. Was just yeah. It's your okay. Your okay, I'm sorry for that. So it was fired, and because of this shareholder, they didn't agree with having political science program, or I don't know what was the reason behind that. But yeah, I think we should, and I think it, you know, we should have laws that doesn't allow for this kind of behavior just because it's a private institution. So that should be addressed, and as scholars, we should also research that and be aware of this problem. Then your your comment about that's yes about this kind of other ways of constraining freedom than setting these kind of outcome indicators and looking at universities' public employment services. Yes, I think there's this debate in higher education studies. I think it was Vukasovic who wrote about this value for money discourses, and this is a well researched area, and I think this is also what Andrea Petru was also writing about, that the state can, and this is actually what was the main reason behind. What kind of main justifications what happened in Hungary, which universities kind of pushing out almost all universities into public trust foundations, which are then filled with government loyalist boards with lifetime appointees, and given all the assets and all discretionary power over universities to these boards who are loyal to the university with huge salaries. And there's the same thing that humanities are waste of time, and we shouldn't finance them, or social sciences. Actually, what is really absurd in these things, that in these debates, that actually humanities and social science graduates have higher employment levels than those who are in the STEM fields, and are actually quite, so these are really generalist, in a generalist economy which we have now. We shouldn't look at universities' vocational education training universities. That's also a good thing with duale Hochschule. For example, in Germany, you have this kind of type of institutions, but that's a different institutional types. And I think this is kind of the anti-intellectualism in certain political circles, which we see, and we should concentrate on that in research and counteract and solidarize with our colleagues. And that was this, your question. I think it's not a marginal thing. I'm also a CU graduate, so I'm well aware of the problems that are also there. But I think this kind of publishing fees are one of the major issues in also affecting academic freedom. So this is kind of the best business model there is, because you have research usually largely funded by public funds, and then by public funds paid in order to have them open access. So, and you don't do anything. I mean, you just put up PDFs files on a on a website, which everybody can. My 11 years old son can do that for us if we ask him to, for free. I guess we can buy him some Legos and that's it. But not 3,500 euros like in Wiley, for example, or Taylor and Francis. And I think this is also a main issue which we mentioned about kind of the differences between countries, like rich and poor, north and south, that it's actually exacerbating these differences. Because, for example, the German rector conference and other university associations were able to negotiate a deal with most of the publishers. So I am able from Konstan to publish my research in most of the journals now on the market for free of charge, open access, whereas our colleagues in Romania or in Hungary, and these are just EU countries, so I'm not mentioning even poorer countries, cannot do that, and they are behind paywall. So, and I feel a bit guilty in perpetuating these things, but so we are kind of pushed into this thing, and this is I think one of the main issues now in academia, and with these kind of golden open access models, it was something that should solve this problem, but it just made it worse.
So thank you for the questions. I will start with the last one that you just posed. I think it's different. There's a difference between having conflict over different fields. We are always going to have those conflicts in any classroom, not only in if we are discussing very polemical subjects or very contested subjects or war, but there is a difference between having disagreements. This is part of what we do. We are there to have arguments and to disagree with each other. Having conflicting views is one thing. Crossing the lines, and we should have those lines, is something else. Because then we are, as I said before, we are constraining the freedom of others. We are putting them in subject positions from where they cannot speak. We are silencing their voices and making different environments to different people. So I would not confuse it with conflict of opinions. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I don't think there is a question unanswered. So if you allow me, I will just make a brief reflection, which was inspired by what Martin said about the relationship between state and the universities, and also what Daniela mentioned previously. In my field, which is very specific, which is China focused, I do think there will be more and more requests by the state to regulate universities. Of course, it may be done in a more actor agnostic way than actor specific way, but there would probably be the reality. And if there are regulations which are going to be imposed on universities, such as very simple ones as due diligence, make sure that students or unauthorized personnel, to make it actor agnostic, do not enter laboratories, or all these kind of regulations or requests. And I think that state should be ready to provide financial and also legal support to do that, not only delegate to universities saying you are now supposed to do this and that, but also actually provide an environment where this is possible to incorporate. And universities actively should have the agency in this process, should not be just on the recipient, and they should actually, it is in their interest, after all, to be transparent, to behave in a responsible way. So I still think there is a time for the dialogue. And some universities already started to comply, though there are no requests as for now. They will be probably coming. And here I'm thinking about Charles University, because we are sitting at Charles University establishing a security manager, which has its pros and cons. It's a first point of contact you can reach out to if you have an email from university or partner or a scholar you are not familiar with asking to enter into cooperation. So it's a point to help. It's quite quick, and it's within your own home institution. It has a con as well, because you have to pay for that person. That person most likely is going to be responsible for way other areas as well, like GDPR or other issues. So that limits how much he, she, or them, if it's more people, can actually focus on the question of due diligence and help provided to academics, but also perhaps students if they need to. And the question here is, of course, as well, would they have access to information you need? Are they actually able to do the due diligence? Would they have access to state intelligence agencies to actually check whether this person is a good idea to work in, I don't know, lab focusing on artificial intelligence or nanotechnologies? So what probably may be a better model, though it will take a lot of time, is to follow the Dutch example, which they established a national contact point, which is one single point under the government where all universities, be it private, publicly owned as well, academics, scholars can reach out to have a help, to ask for questions. And the specific institute have links to, or national contact point have links to different ministries and also to state apparatus in security area. So of course, there is a hook, as always, in this area. Those recommendations which are given by national contact points are voluntarily. So still you can decide as a university that it's your autonomy to to accept someone who may be problematic and who was flagged by your own secret services, for example, as a person with problems. But just to wrap it up, I think it's an area which probably will undergo some regulation. It's good for universities to be prepared. It's good to be a part of the process, and they should be actually a part of the process, because I do also not trust the state.
Thank you. I believe we had a very, very fruitful discussion, very good roundtable, and very grateful to the speakers for coming and sharing their views with us. And it's evident that we need to talk about academic freedom again. So the topic should be again in our general conference program, but probably we need to think about additional spots for raising more and more the different aspects that have emerged today. So I also would like to share the fact that we are thinking about the possibility of turning this working group into a permanent body. So working group is like temporary label, something that is obviously destined to expire, but it is evident that we need to discuss more. And so this will be probably a permanent body, a permanent forum, and we strongly encourage all of you to reach out and to let us know how we can be more helpful and how we can be more proactive as well. And I also would like to strongly encourage all of you to pitch your ideas on the loop. Please, so on the blog series on constraints on academic freedom, as it is clear that there are several things that can be shared and can be discussed, and is a perfect forum for attract also and also start new discussion. Hana?
Yes, and I would like to conclude by thanking Daniela Irrera, the chair of this roundtable, but also the chair of the working group, who has been a tour de force in putting this agenda on our platform and making sure that it stays relevant and that we keep track of it. So thank you to you. Thank you to all you participants for coming here, sharing your views from different perspectives. I appreciately liked how it kind of clicked together, although you were talking on diverse topics, how it was a very coherent roundtable, at least for me. And again, to be continued, the discussion over our loop. So do reach out also to our friends here, as well as us as editors of this particular series. Thank you very much.